part of the ministerial code is being upheld?
Well, it's not just the ministerial code, it's the role of Parliament, which almost sits above the ministerial code. Mr. Speaker feels this very strongly, that we are accountable to Parliament.
Do you feel this very strongly?
Yes, I do, and that's why I regularly discuss it with the Speaker and look at. He will usually flag with me where he's got concerns, as I would expect him to, and then we go through those and try to make sure they're not. Were you aware of this
point of order raised last week?
I was, yes.
Thank you. I will now refer to a further contemporary example. I understand that this coming Thursday, the last day before the forthcoming parliamentary recess, your government, Prime Minister, intends to publish a progress report on the Grenfell inquiry by way of a written ministerial statement. Given Mr. Speaker's comments and your confirmation that you're aware of that point of order, as head of government, why are you permitting this lack of upholding standards, given the important progress report in the Grenfell inquiry and other statements that I understand will be made on Thursday? What are you going to do about that?
Well, I'll happily have a look at the proposed written ministerial statement on Thursday and discuss it with the Speaker.
Thank you. Now, paragraph 1.6 bracket C of the Ministerial Code, it quotes, "It is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity." Prime Minister, you are of course familiar with that paragraph of your Ministerial Code, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, by reference to a recent example and to assist you in showing how you comply with the extract from the Ministerial Code, I would like to turn to last week's Prime Minister's questions, when the Leader of the Opposition asked you, how many extra teachers are there since your government took office? Now, fullfact.org, a neutral website, only a few days ago published that the PM, and I quote, claimed that the number of teachers in England is more than when the Conservatives left office. Fullfact.org added, and I quote, "This is not supported by the latest school workforce census figures, which show a fall, not a rise." Can you tell this committee which Nolan principle underpinned your answer?
Well, what I was putting before the House is the fact that we are committed to recruiting an additional 6,500 new teachers, and we've got record numbers of trainees coming into the system, and therefore that number is going up. The role, if you look at secondary schools, further education colleges, the number of teachers has gone up. That's absolutely clear. That's what our commitment was. In relation to primary schools, the number of pupils has gone down pretty dramatically in terms of the birth rate, and therefore the sheer number of teachers at primary level has gone down because less teachers are needed because the birth rate has gone down. But the focus, just for completeness, in our plan for change and in a manifesto was on 6,500 new teachers for secondary schools, specialist schools and colleges, and that's the number I was referring to.
Thank you very much. Can I now turn to the issue of written parliamentary questions and standards? Now, I know my colleague, the Honourable Member for Lancaster and Wyre, as Chair of the Procedure Committee, has issued calls for evidence in her committee's new inquiry. Now, paragraph 9.8 of your Ministerial Code states, and I quote, "Ministers should, where possible, provide full and timely responses to written parliamentary questions, ministerial correspondence and select committee reports." Once again, can I ask you to confirm to this committee that you're familiar with that paragraph of the Ministerial Code?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you explain why your government is failing to provide timely responses to WBQs as obligated under the standards outlined by your own Ministerial Code?
Well, we do our level best to comply, of course, and I think the Procedure Committee is looking into this, which we welcome, and we'll study carefully the findings and any recommendations that are made.
Thank you. Paragraph 1.6d of the Ministerial Code states, "Ministers," and I quote, "should be as open as possible with Parliament and the public, refusing to provide information only when disclosure would not be in the public interest." Are you satisfied that this is in compliance with the high standards you've set your government, the responses that are currently being made?
Yes, but obviously if the Procedure Committee in due course sets out its findings and any recommendations, I'd want to study them to see whether we can improve in any way.
Smith MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, it's an indisputable fact that political staff in Number 10 have been briefing against serving cabinet ministers, and you and I both sat on opposition benches whilst we had to watch the painful spectacle of political advisers briefing under Johnson and a litany of Tory Prime Ministers. Given that your record when it comes to ministers shows that you've acted very decisively and without favour in terms of applying the ministerial code, I wondered if you could say, given your responsibility for setting and upholding standards across government, if you could explain what steps you've taken to establish the facts and how you're going to ensure that Number 10 political staff act in accordance with the ministerial code, the special advisors code and the Nolan principles.
Yeah, I mean, let me say to start with that briefing against cabinet ministers is completely unacceptable, whether that's from Number 10 or anywhere else, and I've made that repeatedly clear to my staff, to the Cabinet, and put in place a number of procedures where there have been such allegations to give me a level of assurance that it has not happened in relation to direct briefings against ministers and members of the Cabinet. But I've been really clear and consistent on this with my staff, with my team, with the Cabinet, and put in place procedures when there are allegations to assure myself what the situation is.
Well, and on the subject of leaks, Prime Minister, last week the Treasury Select Committee had the Chancellor in front of us, and she was very cross about the information that was in the 13th of November Financial Times article by George Parker, a renowned political journalist, and she was clear that that was a leak, and she said, and I'm absolutely categorical, and I'm quoting her here, that this was not an authorised briefing. It was incredibly damaging and frustrating. That is why we have a leak inquiry. It was not briefing that was signed off by me or any of my ministers or officials. It was unacceptable. So that does, if it's not the ministers and other officials in the Treasury, there is a danger that it could have been a leak from Number 10. Do you think there was a leak from Number 10 Downing Street about the budget?
In relation to that incident, there's a leak inquiry going on, as I think I know
we know,
the Chancellor.
yes, absolutely, yes, yeah. The Chancellor's announced.
So that will go wherever the evidence takes it.
So if there was a leak from Number, do you think there was a leak from Number 10?
I've no reason to think there was a leak from Number 10.
So, but if there were a leak from Number 10, what would you do about? What would you do if there was someone was found?
I'd take action. I mean, and I have taken action. It's very difficult with leaks to get to the source of the information.
You would take action.
Where that has happened in the past, I have taken action. Which has led to the removal of individuals.
Okay, so you would go as far as removing an individual if they were found to have leaked the budget?
Obviously I'll wait for the inquiry, but I mean, the inquiry will go wherever the evidence takes it. There's nothing to inhibit where they will go, and I'll take appropriate action if there's a finding. Because
the report in the FT was very clear. It talked about an official source, and Mr. Parker is a journalist who would have sourced that story. So a very big concern.
I'll get to the bottom of these leaks. They are. In any organisations, they're intolerable. I took the same action when I was head of the Crown Prosecution Service. There is a leak inquiry. It can go wherever the evidence will take it. And if it comes to a conclusion, I'll act on it.
Okay, so you're going to be ruthless with whoever's done this if they're found.
Well, I want to stop these leaks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alberto.
Thank you, Chair. There is a separate code of conduct, of course, governing standards for special advisers. It's called the Code of Conduct for Special Advisers. You are, of course, familiar with this document, aren't you? Thank you. Paragraph 13 of the Code of Conduct for Special Advisers states, and I quote, "Briefing on purely party political matters must be handled by the party machine. For the purposes of this code, can you confirm that Labour Party leadership speculation is a purely party political matter?"
No, I'm not sure I can. It seems to be pretty right. In terms of the code, I know exactly where it should be dealt with, but I can say hand on heart that none of it is comes from me or is encouraged by me.
Well, we'll come. But I just wanted to confirm that it's a purely party political matter in accordance with the code. Labour Party.
Well, I think the code is dealing with political briefings of a political nature, which have to come through the party, obviously, and can't come through the civil service. I think wider speculation is not necessarily a code issue.
Thank you. Well, paragraph 15 of the code, just to help you, Prime Minister, goes further. Special advisers must not take public part in political controversy. They must observe discretion and express comment with moderation, avoiding personal attacks. So you're very familiar with the code. I would like to refer to an interview that you gave to Sky News last month. On that interview, for the purposes of assisting you, Prime Minister, I'll just recap that interview. You were asked, you say that that was unauthorised, referring to alleged leaks about West Streeting. You said that that was unauthorised. That makes it sound you've lost complete control of your Downing Street operation. Why didn't you sack the person who was responsible for attacking one of your colleagues? You responded, first, let me be absolutely clear that any briefing against ministers is completely unacceptable. That is not a new position for me. It's a position I've adopted ever since I became Prime Minister. I've been talking to my team today and been assured that no briefing against ministers was done by number 10. You're saying it didn't come from Downing Street. And you responded, I've been assured, second time, it didn't come from Downing Street. Who gave you that assurance?
Well, I had assurance from within Downing Street on a number of different levels, different people in my team.
Who gave you that assurance?
Different levels in my team. I'm not
Can you please tell us who gave you that assurance?
Was it officials or for special advisors that were giving you assurance? Just give us a
special advisors.
Thank you.
I'm not going to name members of staff, but I will add this. I didn't just take everything at face value. I looked at other bits of evidence to assure myself about what I was then saying publicly to the media.
Thank you. That interview ended as follows. If it didn't come from Downing Street, where did it come from, and will you sack the person responsible? You responded, well, I will absolutely deal with anybody responsible for briefing against ministers. And this is the salient point. I've always said that's the standard I expect, and that's the standard I will enforce. Although you just answered a moment ago to the Chair that you have taken action and you've removed individuals, can you just confirm for this committee that in the example that I've cited, when you said that you would enforce a standard, what standard did you enforce in respect of this example?
Well, I can only take action where I've got a clear finding that somebody has breached a relevant duty or standard. When I have had that, I've acted accordingly. And that's not something new to me as Prime Minister. It's what I did as Leader of the Opposition. It's what I did as the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Thank you. My final questions, Chair. Can I turn to another issue that you rightly regularly raised when you were Leader of the Opposition, namely your frequent criticism of previous administrations' alleged cronyism and the way in which public appointments were undertaken? Now, only last month, Prime Minister, you profoundly regretted your own involvement in the appointment process for the chair of the Independent Football Regulator. In your own letter to your independent ministerial advisor, you said, and I quote, in retrospect, it would have been better if I had not been given the note or confirmed that I was content with the appointment. This was an unfortunate error for which I express my sincere regret. Sir Laurie, in his response, stated, it is regrettable, as you say in your letter, that despite the recusal we agreed in autumn 2024 concerning the Football Governance Bill, you were asked to confirm that you were content with the proposed appointment. Can you give this committee an update on progress of your internal review that you said to Sir Laurie would take place to ensure this breach in standards does not happen again?
Well, firstly, can I say, in relation to David Coburn, that he was first approached by the previous government for this role. And therefore, I reject the cronyism allegation, which I don't think should rightly be put in his case. He was then endorsed by the cross-party committee. So he was headhunted by the previous government because of his suitability for the role, appointed by this government and endorsed by the cross-party committee. I had recused myself in relation to the bill. The decision to appoint was for DCMS minister. That's set out in the legislation, in the statute. So I knew full well it wasn't my decision. As it happens, a note was put before me to say that's what was going to happen, and was I content? And the independent advisor took the view, which I agree with, that it would have been better if that note had never been put before me. In other words, that the recusal had meant I didn't even get the note before me. But when I said I was content, I was well aware I wasn't the decision maker, because I knew that the legislation set out who the decision maker was, and it was the minister in the relevant department by law, and therefore it couldn't be me in any event. I had actually been talking to the independent advisor about it throughout, as he makes clear in his letter. So this was I always take his advice, even if I don't think there's anything wrong, just so that I've got. But just if you asked me, when you asked me, I've now asked him to look again at when someone says they're recusing themselves. What are then the processes that need to be put in the office to make sure that even a decision which isn't for the recused person is coming by way of note, in effect, isn't put before them, and that's what just to make sure that we're not in that position again. But I was well aware that I was not the decision maker, because I knew by law it was the minister.
Thank you. Thanks, Prime Minister. Finally, on other public appointments, can I refer you to your recent decision as Prime Minister on appointments to the House of Lords? Prior to the general election, you promised to reduce political appointments to the Lords, and indeed stated as much in your party's manifesto. Might you understand why the public might feel that you're not upholding the high standards you set yourself on appointments to the House of Lords?
Well, it's important that the House of Lords is able to do its vital work of scrutinising legislation. There's an imbalance in the Lords at the moment in the numbers of peers for the relevant political parties, and it's right that we get the balance right as we go forward. But the overarching work to reduce the size of the House of Lords is ongoing. The Hereditary Peers Bill has been going through. And it is important.
My question, it was specifically about your comments prior to the general election and the decision that you made last week. But thank you very much, Prime Minister, for the answers that you've given. Thank you.
Simon Hoare, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, good afternoon. Public trust is pivotal if governance of this country and all of our public life is to be supported and trusted. And that is, I'm afraid, it seems to be a value which is declining. The trust of the public in what we do and why we do it. Baroness Deach, before my committee last week, commented, it's quite interesting how oppositions change their position on standards from when they're in opposition to then going into government. We're doing a piece of work which is clearly showing that notwithstanding Nolan, notwithstanding the EIC, notwithstanding amendments to the ministerial code, there is still an element of what I suppose in the old terms you could have called the good chaps principle, HOLAC, etc. In order to future-proof against rogue operators, and in order to try to bolster declining public confidence, what consideration, if any, have you given or might you give to putting quite a lot of these bodies on a statutory footing, including the ethics advisor at number 10, so that the public can see that there are dispassionate people who take decisions based on good judgment and sound evidence?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, on the ministerial code, obviously, I did strengthen, and then I also took the step. The independent advisor, before I became Prime Minister, was not able to initiate investigations, could only do it with the Prime Minister's approval, and I thought that was wrong in principle, and that we would it would be better if the independent advisor, who was appointed under the last government but continued under me, had the ability to say of his own volition, I think this is serious enough for me to look at it. So I have done that. I'm not convinced at the moment we need to go further and put on a statutory basis, but I never close my mind to further steps that could be taken, whether it's in relation to the independent advisor or any of the other relevant bodies.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to the Plan for Change, which was the government's plan on entering government, and the 5 missions that were established. And I'm going to ask Helen Hayes to kick off on the Opportunity Mission. Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
Prime Minister, your personal commitment to further education and skills is really clear, and we've seen some positive announcements from the government in relation to technical excellence, colleges and qualifications reform in the skills white paper. But my committee has recently completed an inquiry on further education and skills, and we found that there are 2 areas that are really holding the FE sector back at the moment. The first of those is that unlike other post-16 education providers, FE colleges and standalone sixth form colleges are unable to claim VAT back on their expenditure. This is a tax for which there is no a tax position for which there is no justification, and my committee was very clear on that from the evidence that we found. Will you undertake to speak to the Treasury about this anomaly, which is holding post-16 education providers back from delivering against the government's mission?
I certainly have a look at it and talk to the Treasury about it. I'm very keen to do what we can to further education. I think it's part of the system that needs more work, more resource, more capability, and more weight behind it. So I'll certainly have a look at that issue.
Thank you very much. As an example of the scale of change, a difference that would make, a college that my committee visited told us that the amount that they were unable to claim back in VAT made the difference between a whole extra story on a new building that they had recently completed that they weren't able to add to that building. The second area that my committee found as a problem for the FE sector is the disparity in teacher pay for teachers teaching the same subjects within FE colleges compared with schools. A pay disparity of up to 15% makes it really, really hard for them to recruit the teachers that they need, and also difficulties in getting people from industry to come and teach on within the further education sector. On a recent visit to Switzerland, we found that the Swiss rail system pay their staff more. They get an extra premium if they are prepared to undertake training for apprentices within the rail system. We've just had the announcement on the setting up of Great British Rail. Will you look at the premium that is placed on training for the next generation of the rail industry within the leverage that you have with Great British Rail, and seek to learn from Switzerland on how important it is that the next generation are really well trained?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the Swiss experience and approach, but certainly very willing to have a look at that. I mean, we do need, in terms of further education colleges, we need to improve the skills, the courses, focus them and make sure they link with the work that those coming out are most likely to be able to do. The retention and recruitment of teachers is hugely important in that sector for some of the reasons you set out. So anything we can do to help in that regard, I'll certainly have a look at the Swiss example and see whether some or all of it can be applied here in the United Kingdom.
Thank you. And then final question from me. We've also seen some really positive announcements from the government on opportunities for young people through the Youth Guarantee and the Youth Strategy announced last week. We've spoken previously in this committee about some of the barriers that hold care-experienced young people back from being able to take advantage of opportunities that are available to them. The government is still resistant to a national offer for care leavers, which would provide confidence and clarity for care leavers across the country that wherever they live, the same support and entitlements would be available to them. Will you look again at that commitment, which would really enable care leavers to be able to access some of the great opportunities the government is making available to young people across the country?
Yes, and certainly in the context of the Youth Guarantee, that would be a sensible place to start in relation to the support that's going in from 13 weeks for 2 years and then into, if necessary, after 18 months, the offer of a job that the government will support with business so that young people can actually get into a job, which I think will make a material difference as a stepping stone to them. But certainly happy to look at for care leavers where there's anything in the Youth Guarantee or the Youth Strategy for that matter.
If you're a care leaver who can't access housing or you can't access help with transport costs, which some care leavers can and some can't, depending where you live in the country, you're not going to be able to access the 13 weeks of training to get into employment.
Certainly happy to look at that again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Andy Slaughter MP.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Sir Brian Levison's independent review of the criminal courts has 45 recommendations in Part 1 alone, but the controversy around it is centred on changes to the jury system, specifically the mode of trial which will apply in intermediate cases. the plans seem to involve a quarter to a half of current jury trials being heard by magistrates or a judge sitting alone. Yet we are told this will only affect about 1 or 2% of all criminal trials. So it's difficult to see how it will address the Crown Court backlog. Would it not be sensible to postpone decision on the future of jury trials until we have more reliable information and can see what the impact on the backlog will be?
Well, I mean, firstly, just putting those figures into context, of all the cases that go to court, criminal cases that go to court in this country, 90% are in the magistrates' court and therefore don't have a jury in any event. 10% go to the Crown Court, where there's the potential for a jury. 7% of those plead guilty, and therefore, of all the criminal cases that go to our criminal courts, 3% currently go before a jury. They're the most serious. The proposals that Brian Leveson has recommended, and he's a highly respected judge, and would change that to about 2.25%. On its own, I accept the challenge that will not on its own be the silver bullet that speeds up our criminal cases, but it is one element of a package. And I'm acutely aware that victims in our criminal justice system are waiting too long for justice. I'm particularly concerned about violence against women and girls, where all the indicators are that still 60% of victims and survivors will not make it through to the final hurdle of being in court because they'll have dropped out along the way, either pre-charge, during charge, because they're waiting 3 or 4 years to give their evidence. And even in the last week, I've had examples of a 14-year-old who gave evidence when she was 18 and was cross-examined uphill and down Dale about that. Very hard 4 years after the event to deal with that. Or a young woman who was 16 at the time of the alleged offence and giving evidence when she was a young woman of 20. That isn't acceptable, and we have to do whatever we can to improve that. And our criminal justice system has been too slow for too long. This isn't just a recent phenomenon. I've been on this for the best part of 20 years.
Mr. Slaughter.
It's also the case that, and this is not in the Leveson report, that magistrates' court sentences are proposed to go from, until very recently, 6 months for an offence up to a maximum of 24 months. And swift courts will involve a judge sitting alone without magistrates. As I say, they're not in Leveson, so why is the government going down this route? And isn't this more likely to lead to the unintended consequence of even more custodial sentences, undoing the work of reducing prison numbers as set out in the sentencing bill and the Gork review?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, the most serious crimes will still go before a jury. So anything over 3 years, all indictable only offences, rape, murder, manslaughter, GBH, robbery, arson with intent to kill, all those very serious offences still go before our juries. But we have to answer the question, how do we speed up the processes that we have? How do we make a system that measures the delivery of justice in months, not years, and it's been years for far too long. Sir Brian Leveson painted the picture of the system in virtual crisis. We cannot go on like that. In relation to the sentencing point, obviously this goes alongside the changes that we're making in relation to sentencing and various presumptions that are there at the same time. So the two of them have to go together. Of course, we need to keep looking at it, to keep checking that we've got it right. But I, for one, am not prepared anymore to just walk past what has been a stain on our criminal justice system for far too long, and I'm absolutely determined to do something about it.
Mr. Slaughter.
There's widespread support for the Hillsborough Bill, not least because it offers equality of arms between victims and the state in addressing unlawful state action. Doesn't the same inequality exist between the press and those who, in Jerry McCann's words, are monstered by them? But 13 years after the Leveson Review of Press Ethics, most newspapers are not subject to independent regulation, and there is no low-cost way to challenge media errors. Last week, over 30 victims of press intrusion, including Christine Flack, Kate and Jerry McCann, and Margaret Aspinall, whom you know, and whose son James died at Hillsborough, wrote to you to ask you to meet them and discuss their experiences. Will you meet them?
Yes, of course.
Finally, can I ask this? AI, artificial intelligence, can violate individual privacy, entrench discrimination, or hinder access to justice. you've put AI at the heart of the government's mission for growth. But how can you be sure increased use of AI will not lead to a weakening of human rights protection?
Well, we need to get the balance right. I think with AI, it's a huge opportunity. There's huge potential, whether that's in health, where already we're seeing the difference it can make. I've seen for myself some of the use of AI to identify blood clots in stroke victims much more quickly than can be done otherwise, and literally saving lives. Equally, AI with heart monitors that can predict problems of the future and allow preventative measures to be taken. In criminal justice, it is already being used in probation in relation to a huge amount of material. And I know that the judiciary are interested in how it can improve criminal justice. Now, it needs to be within a framework, an architecture that is aware of and attuned to the risks, of course. But I don't think we should, for that reason, take the decision that we wouldn't use AI where it can improve criminal justice or the delivery of all our public services.
No, I don't think anyone's saying that, but it can include personal data, it can be discriminatory, and it can lack transparency, and that needs some human oversight, doesn't it?
Yeah, we do need to make sure we've got the balance right, and where there are potentials for risk, then we need to put measures in place. I completely accept that.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We know that the Joint Committee on Human Rights, as well as a number of other committees in this House, are looking at a lot of these very issues. So I'm sure they'll be feeding that into the government's thinking on this. So thank you. Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Prime Minister, for being before us. When will the government publish the new Violence Against Women and Girls strategy?
As soon as possible, and I was in Downing Street when we brought together all of the various bodies that are helping work with us on that the week before last, and so now we're looking at very shortly in the future. I think the sooner we can get. Well, I would hope to do it as soon as possible. I don't want to commit to a date that ends up not being possible. But I'm not. I mean, I'll be clear with you. I want it out as soon as possible. I'm really pleased with the work we're doing on this. We've got incredibly good individuals and organisations working with us on it. And so we will get it published as soon as we can.
The Home Secretary was on the media round yesterday talking about things that will be in the strategy. I expected we'd have a statement today on it. I'm very surprised we've not got it, if she can do the media round on it.
Yeah, I mean, we're very close. I think we're just finishing off the final bits in the strategy. But I do want to get it out as quickly as possible.
I think, Prime Minister, I mean, in response to Mr. De Costa, you were saying how you thought in statements to the House were important, and here's an example of one where there was a lot being discussed by ministers in the media to the public, but not to Parliament.
Yeah,
which is it?
Well, the strategy is not. I mean, we'll do the strategy in due course, but I mean, it's one.
The government said it would come out before the summer. It then was going to be in September. We've been told time and again it was going to come very soon, and we're still waiting for it. And it's having real world consequences. 3 rape crisis centres, I know, have closed because services cannot be commissioned because the local authorities, etc., do not know what money they're going to have because they don't have the strategy.
No, I want the strategy out as quickly as possible. There are measures we put in place already. The use of specialists in 999 control rooms has been widely welcomed. The National Policing Centre for Violence Against Women and Girls has been established, the domestic abuse protection orders. So there's a number of measures we've already taken. But I mean, I'm not pushing back on it. I want the strategy out as quickly as possible. We just need to finalise it and get it out.
We all do. £53 million has been committed to perpetrator programmes for highest risk perpetrators. There hasn't been a similar amount of money for victims' services. And there's a real disquiet in the sector that actually the victims are being forgotten. What would you say?
Certainly the victims are not being forgotten. They're at the centre of the strategy on violence against women and girls.
There's no money for them that's been committed so
far.
Well,
I'll look at the money commitments again and make sure that we've got that right. But this is a commitment of the government in relation to violence against women and girls. It's a personal commitment of mine. I've been working on this since I became the Director of Public Prosecution.
I remember when you shadowed me when I was in the Home Office. That's why I'm surprised.
No, I genuinely want to do as much as we possibly can. The figures on violence against women and girls are appalling. They've been appalling for a long time. 3 women a week killed by their partner or ex-partner, and that's been the statistic that's been there ever since I've been looking at it, well over 20 years. And we have to shift that, and we need to do that with the strategy and pull together all of the individuals and organisations who've got huge experience here, and that's why I brought them all into Downing Street as a group the week before last.
We'll look forward to the strategy.
Yeah.
Another thing we're waiting for is the police reform white paper, which again we were expecting we'd have by now. Do you think there are too many police forces in England and Wales?
Well, I'm not going to speculate in relation to that. I do think we need to...
Prime Minister, you were DPP. You might have a view on this.
Look, when I was DPP, we reduced the number of CPS areas from 42 to 13. So we streamlined that. I'm well aware that you also have to look at where the courts are streamlined, where probation is streamlined, etc. But no decisions have been made about this yet. But are there some functions that could be across forces? Yes, I think there probably are, and where that's been possible, it's worked well. Are there some areas such as, the uniforms, the police cars, that could be better looked at across a number of forces? Yes, I absolutely think there are. So I'm up for rationalising it, but no decision on what the final configuration has been arrived at in relation to that.
Put a plea in for Staffordshire, having had what happened to Staffordshire ambulance services when we merged into West Midlands. I think we'd like to keep our police in Staffordshire.
No, I completely get that. And the chief constable knowing his or her patch is really important.
Really is.
The question is slightly, I've approached it slightly differently, which is, are the sort of structural issues where you could look at types of offence which aren't usually confined within a county border, where we could make better use of work across forces than we are at the moment, rather than just a structural reset in terms of numbers isn't, I think, the answer to this. The answer is probably looking at the functions and where those functions sit.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to the white paper. I want to finish on asylum accommodation. The government said that they were looking to open large sites in Crowborough and Inverness by the end of November. They've not opened yet. When will they open?
As soon as we're satisfied that they're ready, but we have got military sites under consideration. Obviously, we need to make sure that they're suitable and that all the necessary checks have been carried out. But we do want, asylum hotels were at their height measured, I think it was 400 or so. They're down to about 200 now. I'm absolutely determined that we will close them by the end of this Parliament, sooner if it's possible, and that's why military sites are under consideration.
Can you understand the how local residents feel and the uncertainty there is? They've been told that they've been identified as a site. They don't know when it's going to open. They don't know what the clientele are going to be, and there is real concern. And the MPs that represent those areas have made representations to me as chair of the Select Committee. We really need to understand how this is going to affect local areas. Can you sympathise with that?
I do understand that, and in the end, the question needs to move away from where are we housing people whose asylum claims haven't been processed to how can we more quickly get the lists down so we don't have to go through the exercise of housing them anywhere or for very long. We inherited record levels of claims because they weren't being properly processed under the last government. We are bringing them down as quickly as we can. But for me, that has to be a priority because in the end, whether it's hotels or other accommodation or military sites, the better answer to the question is how do we get the numbers down in the first place?
Thank you very much, Mr. Patricia Ferguson, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, earlier this year, the UK's first sanctioned drug consumption facility opened in Glasgow. It's called the Thistle, and it exists because of a statement of prosecution policy given to it by the Lord Advocate. In the Scottish Affairs Committee's report, we urged the Government to take an evidence-based approach to the facility's future. In its response, the Home Office has reiterated that it will not amend the law to put the facility on a sound legal footing. Given the scale of Scotland's drug crisis, with the highest death rates in Europe from drug overdoses and drug abuse, can you commit to reconsidering the position if the evaluation from the pilot shows that the facility has been effective in reducing drug deaths and drug harms?
Yep. First, let me pick up on your absolutely valid point that there are just an unacceptable, a terribly high number of drug-related deaths in Scotland, particularly in Glasgow, which is very much the focus of this discussion. We've looked at it and we do not intend to amend the law, But the way, as I understand it, that the scheme operates in Scotland, which allows it to take account of factors that are peculiar or more focused, I should say, in Scotland, particularly the high number of deaths, in relation to prosecutorial discretion in terms of what action will follow if these centres are set up. So that is an area which, to my mind, is rightly better taken by those in Scotland addressing the particular issues that they have. But I don't think it should lead to a wider UK-wide changing of the drug laws.
Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. Cat Smith MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, you've repeatedly said that the economic mission of this government is to be on the side of working people. Is that still your position?
Yes.
Yes. And do you consider farmers, many of whom are getting up at 4 a.m, working 365 days a year, feeding the nation, to be working people, yes or no?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Because last year, rural communities, including many farmers, put their trust in Labour for the very first time in a very long time and gave us a mandate for change in this country. However, and I hear this from many of the 950 farm holdings in my constituency, feel like they were misled around the changes to IHT and APR, which are going to pull the rug from underneath farming communities and obliterate the family farm for many farmers. We're in a situation now where elderly farmers or farmers with terminal diagnosis are in a position whereby if they die before April, their farm will pass to the next generation with no tax implications. But if they die after, the potential of their family farm being completely unviable. Can you see how farmers can feel like this government hasn't necessarily treated them in the way that they expect to be treated as working people?
Well, look, I do understand the concern, and I met with the president of the NFU just last week, as I've met with him before, to run through the particular concerns they have. I do think on agricultural property relief, there had to be sensible reform, and I think this is sensible reform. We did make an amendment in the budget, obviously, in relation to the spousal transfer, and more generally, we are sustaining £11.8 billion in sustainable farming this Parliament, so there's a lot of money set aside in the budget. There's a roadmap that we're agreeing with farmers as to the way forward, and of course, Minette Batters, the ex-president of the NFU, has just completed a report for us on profitability and how we drive up profitability year on year, which I think is vitally important because in a sense that's the missing factor here, which is the amount of money that farmers can make year on year, and we need to drive that amount up.
And the issue with the money that was in the budget is I think it's been overshadowed in the same way the Countryside Stewardship Fund has been overshadowed by the IHT issue. And I think that the political damage is that whilst the ambitions of government were, I think, quite right in terms of tackling tax avoidance that could go on in, like, say, large country estates, the collateral damage is that it's actually the small family farm which is feeling the hit of this. And the changes in the budget won't go any way to benefit one of my constituents who is 89 next month. He's already widowed, so he will not be able to benefit from the spousal transfer that has been announced. And given that you've been a Prime Minister who is, and I think quite admirably, changed courses in the past when issues have been exposed to the absolute reality of things, would you consider changing course on this issue?
Well, I mean, firstly, let me just reassure, I mean, the vast majority, 3/4, I think, of farmers simply not affected at all. And of those that are affected, the rate that's paid is half the rate that's over a 10-year period. In relation to the particular example, if you're happy to give me further details, I'll certainly have my team
happy, right, Prime Minister,
look at that.
One final question, Chair, if I may, and this won't have sunk in, I don't think, is the Prime Minister aware that some farmers who have terminal diagnosis now are actively planning to expedite their own deaths so they hit before April? Is he aware of that?
I've had discussions with a number of individuals who've drawn all manner of things to my attention.
Thank you very much. Alistair Carmichael MP.
And you understand, Prime Minister, that the basis for that actually sits